Welcome back to the Future Figure Skating podcast. I'm Anna Keller. I'm the host. I'm very excited to be back with Maja Luther, who's returning to the podcast. Thanks for coming back on again, Maja.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Maja was on our episode about the Contemporary Skating Alliance and talked a little bit about her work there, but I'll also give a bit of a background here that Maja is a creative working in performative arts, creating interdisciplinary work on ice and working in figure skating and focusing on movement skills and efficiency. Very interesting description of your work that I know we'll get into. Maja has an MA in creative practice and diploma in dance studies from Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance in London and performed over a decade in professional shows as a soloist. And in that time, managed and led ice shows for 5 years and choreographed professional performances. So, Maja, I wanted to have you back to talk about the article that you recently published in the Journal of Dance and Somatic Practice called Body Melts, a Somatic Approach to Figure Skating. It's a really interesting article, and I feel like I learned a lot from reading it. But just to start off, I only recently learned the word somatic. And now I feel like it's cropping up everywhere, as things do when you first hear them and then suddenly they're everywhere. But how do you define somatics?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. I'm really glad you enjoyed the read of the article. It was really fascinating for me to do the research, and I'm glad other people are interested in the topic as well. So somatics, or in terms of somatic dance practices, it's a movement practice that really supports and emphasizes for the mover to stay with their own internal sensations. It's really about listening to yourself, being in the moment, in what comes up, what you can feel and sense, and moving from a point of that connection. Yeah.
Very interesting. And how did you come into including somatic practices in your work or your studies? Is this something that came through your dance education or you were aware of previously?
Well, I think consciously, definitely through my first degree at Trinity Laban. I started there in 2015. And I was already, in my late 20s, already a Korean performing as a figure skater. And basically, I had to relearn contemporary dance, or not relearn. I had to learn something completely new patterns in my body in contemporary dance class that, I hadn't practiced before. And I was just so fascinated by the teaching quality at Trinity Laban and how the teachers brought to us the technique, because it was a very diverse program. There was professional dancers, and there was people like me who had different backgrounds, like acrobats or actors, or me from figure skating. So and we had different levels in technique, and I was in the base level, and it was such a great experience because they worked a lot with sensing of breath, with really sensing the initiation of a movement, where you start, how it moves through the body, and really giving you a lot of technical input on your sensory skills, and how to just be more efficient in the movement through utilizing the right muscles and not overemphasizing or forcing things. And in that time, I didn't completely click in the first week, that really using also a somatic approach, but over time, it became evident. And then when I went back for my MA, we had a whole entire module that was for somatic practices at a place called Independent Dance in London. And there we went really deeply into various techniques over the course of the module. And yeah, from that moment on, I think I was really able to go much deeper in the dance studio, and then as well also take all of that onto the ice. So I already did that in my first degree. And when I used to go to practice at the end of the week, it was like Friday afternoon in London, I managed to go to a rink, and I had worked a lot with breathing, a lot like with really sensing into body parts, like trying new movement patterns, new movement material. And then in my MA, it just, allowed me to go much more into getting more clarity in my movement and allowing much more space for creative exploration through those concepts on the ice.
Yeah, that's great. As you are approaching bringing this practice into figure skating, what are some of the potential benefits that you started to investigate for figure skaters?
So first of all, the research encompassed, on one hand, an international survey that I sent out in 2020 in spring, internationally to skating coaches, just to find out in what capacity is somatics used in figure skating, in which way are they using it, and what are the benefits they find with using those techniques. And then the second part was that I did a practice as research with two figure skaters in London, and we were first working in the studio and then on the ice, which then also brought certain technical findings in the research. And then the third part was that the research I did with the skaters in London in the studio and on the ice also informed a creative development towards how can we also use figure skating movement or movement on ice in general, and in what other spaces can that exist? What other spaces can we open up for skating movement to grow and have in the artistic space, have more diversity, and maybe also accessibility in terms of viewing and moving and connection and interaction. So those were the three parts. So with the skaters that I worked with, we had three really distinct findings. So one was a sense of groundedness through the body scans we were doing on the ice. So they felt really, grounded and rooted on the ice, really stable. One finding was also to notice imbalances in the body, so muscular differences, strength, control. Also, again, through those guided body scans on the ice that we had built up on the floor beforehand. So maybe just to give a little bit of context. So the way the research was set up was that I started in the studio with the skaters. And I think we were there for, I think, at least 6 weeks or more, just in the studio, doing very simple exercises of walking and pausing and noticing, like really building up the sensory skills of noticing your breath, your heart rate, like your blood flow, your body temperature, your movement initiation. Like that came a little bit later, but from a pause, like really feeling specifically, where does my movement start? Where is it going? When is it stopping? And then we took that also on the ice. And then on the ice, we had those findings. So the two I already mentioned, noticing imbalances was the second one. And then the third one was also improved presence through the sense of vision. So by being really clear in what you see and how you see, where you're looking, the presence of the skaters really shifted, and it was very noticeable from the outside. So those were the three distinct findings in my research. And then in terms of technique, to your question, like what potential benefits I see or that there could be, one, of course, is through the sense of breath is movement efficiency. So you once have a different oxygen intake by having different breath size. And I think a lot of skaters can relate that when you skate through a program, you just kind of, you have that minimal breath almost the whole time, apart from those maybe 2 spots in the program where you can take 2 deep breaths. But actually, also in skating, like in contemporary dance, you really have the capacity to connect the breath through together with the whole body movement. So yeah, potential benefits. Just the topic is so big, it's hard to come to like one point. But basically, by using the breath, you can become much more efficient. Then also through really sensing initiation and having much clearer body awareness, the size of movement can change, the intensity, the dynamic can change. You can be much more detailed in what you want to do and how you're doing that. And then also a big part of the somatic practices is moving in a non-judgmental space. So, you have the space to just observe and just to notice and just to be with what is and just to move in the way you want to move. So another point is that in somatic dance, most of the practices also use a lot of improvisation. So just guided improvisation, that is where you are led through the improvisation, but in the end, you choose what you do, how much you do, and where you go with the topic.
And so we talked a little bit about the research that you were doing in the studio and in the rink with the skaters, and we'll come back to that. I'm also curious about the research that you did through the survey and the findings. Like, are coaches using somatic practices, and in what way? I think that's a very interesting question, because bits of what you're saying, I'm like, okay, I've seen some people maybe incorporate a little bit of yoga, and then maybe that has some of these pieces, but are they thinking about it in those ways? So yeah, I'm very curious what you've found through that research as well.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I had, I think, 120 replies from many different countries. And what came out actually is that quite a high amount of coaches are using, for example, yoga as a practice within the training. And there's a much smaller part, I think it was something like 18%, I would have to look it up in the paper, that are using somatic practices other than yoga, that are more exploratory in terms of maybe using improvisation or something like Feldenkrais or body-mind centering. Yes, and as I said, there's a quite large percentage that uses yoga. And then with yoga, it's a little bit difficult to say because, you have yoga, and yoga. There's so many different forms of yoga. It really depends on the teacher, how much they are just guiding you through the set of movements for you to follow, how much they might emphasize on what you feel. Of course, the breath is a very important part in yoga practice. So that's inherently there, which is fantastic because you connect the breath to the movement. However, it's also a given structure, right? So you're getting the movement with the breath pattern, and you're moving in this set frame, which is kind of just doing a set of exercises again. So there was a small part of coaches who are more exploratory, and you could tell that they had experienced themselves in using somatic practices for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something I find really interesting. If people were exposed and they found benefits from this for themselves, they also integrated it for their students. There was a really large openness to integrating it and learning more about it, which I found fantastic. I was very excited about that. There was a lot of openness also for feedback for further calls, which I took, as many as I could fit in during the research phase, which was 7. It really showed that I think coaches are really open to expanding. I think there's really an awareness that we do need to shift how we work. We do need to shift how we train to get athletes, to to be healthy long term. There's a lot more awareness about mental health, about, much more of a whole person approach. And that can really support the training, because it opens up a space where the skater is allowed to explore, where the skater is allowed to just find things themselves and is not told what to do and is not told this is wrong or do it again. And yeah, I think also, like, having listened to your podcast, like, there's so many overlaps. Like, for example, Kira Corpi, spoke about this fear-based training and including the skaters. Working in a somatic way is also a lot about language. So the language I use with the athletes, like, okay, where do you think is the weakest point, for example, in your program? And that, that necessarily doesn't have anything to do with somatics, but just opening up the language to incorporate them into the training. And okay, where did you feel? What did you feel? Did you notice when you were breathing? Did you notice when you stopped breathing? Like, just trying to support them in being, getting in touch with their sensory self. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a really interesting result from the survey. And I think there's, like with all research, there's a lot of way to expand and keep going in this as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's so interesting to me to think about all of this, and then to, even to think about incorporating parts of it into my own skating as well, that I was thinking about this yesterday, because I have started working more with Jimmy Morgan, who has a little bit of the, contemporary skating background and has had some exposure to these ideas. And so we were talking about some of the things that we've learned about partnering and using breathing, and trying to think about how we breathe together as a way of better recognizing each other's rhythms and trying to move us away from a very sort of counting based way of learning our rhythms. And so I was, even in that moment, I was thinking, oh, okay, but not only am I doing that to match up with my partner, now I'm actually thinking about at what point we were just doing these swizzles, pull in, push out swizzles back and forth, and having that feeling of the breathing in and out and the contraction and expansion. It made so much sense, but it also then, when I was skating on my own, was making me so much more aware of how I was pushing into the ice in a way that I was actually feeling it and so it's all this stuff that sometimes it's hard to talk about, because it seems like, okay, so you were feeling the ice, like, great. Isn't that what you're always supposed to be doing? You're bending your knees and feeling the ice. But I was like, oh no, I actually think I've never really been feeling it before. I was always thinking about, was I doing the correct motion to produce the correct result? And it was a little bit of that light bulb that went off of, I can actually feel the transfer of the movement that I'm thinking about into the action in a much more connected way. So
I love
I
this.
was having that feeling yesterday, and I was thinking, and thinking about this, and I was really glad that I had a little bit, though, of a framework to put that to contextualize that practice as well. So
yeah, oh, I love that, because you're so right. And it's really hard to explain, actually, because people might say, like, oh, but I am breathing here, I'm breathing like this, and here I'm breathing like that. But it's such a different sensation, like you just explained, when you really understand. If you connect the breath through your body into the ice, it's a completely different sensation of, like, I love doing crossovers now. I mean, I used to not really care about crossovers. Of course, we practice because they have to be efficient and good and look nice. But now I love doing crossovers with breath pattern. It just creates such a different sensation of really that push all the way to the end into the blade. And yeah, it's I think that's a little bit of the struggle of people who haven't had exposure to it, for them to understand what benefit it can have and how useful it can be already for young skaters and teenagers. And I have to say, out of experience, it is much easier from a certain age for them to, like, in terms of like how many people respond. At a certain age, it gets easier. There's some kids that respond really fantastic and they try right away. And then, of course, you have, kids that are really timid and they think it's embarrassing to breathe big and breathe loudly. But yes, I think what I always really enjoy is when I can see the difference. You can just so clearly, like, and in skating, it's especially with the breath pattern, it really, like, I really work with starting with very simple steps, like, strokes, cross rolls, like things that are really repetitive in a pattern where you can really try and find your breath size and find your step size and really come a little bit more into sensing your weight through the breath also, like what you were saying, like you sense the movement in the breath. So, we all feel like we inhale, we grow up a bit, we exhale, we come down, and this down motion you can really use wonderfully to connect with your sense of weight and let that weight drop into the blade and make, again, that feeds into being more efficient, because you don't have to force push your thigh into the ice. You can let your weight be used to propel you forward. And I think what you can really tell when skaters are doing that, when you watch them, I'm just a big advocate to try to implement that already at a younger age, because for some people it comes natural, but for a lot of people it doesn't. And we also, like you said, we're not told, we're not trained to. In most coaching practice, like, that's not something they experience. So why would they pass it on, right? Like, it's just the natural path of progression. Actually, that's also something Kira talked about, what the generation passes on to the generation, and just trying now. I feel like there's a openness in a group of people who are really trying to bring in different aspects into the training and trying to open new doors. And I think that's just very important, because we live in a different age now. Life has changed in many, many ways. And I think we also need to adapt how we train and what we emphasize, and how, like, for me personally, it's really also an approach of, this is a young person and a growing human. What do I want to teach this human to be, and how, like, for their life? Not only, okay, they're going to do really great technical skills on the ice, but, it's, for me, it's also important that they learn something that is not only for the ice, it's for their life, it's for any period in your life. And that can give them something that's they can interpret however they feel.
Yeah.
And it's not right, it's not wrong, it's just what it is for them.
Yeah, and that moving away from that external judgment, I think has so many implications when it comes to how skaters, move through the world, not only on the ice, but in terms of, the ability to have self-confidence, to advocate for yourself, to understand when things are not feeling right, to have confidence in that for yourself. Like, I think there's so many implications in moving away from a sort of do what you're told, or do what is correct kind of approach, that it has a lot of sort of mental and social implications as well.
Exactly. And that's what why I think also I found the topic so fascinating, and why I really focus on somatic practices. And because in that space of improvisation, of guided improvisation, for one, like, it really has to be a safe space where you feel you can explore whatever you want and you are not judged. Like, you can do what you feel like. And so the space, what you said, the non-judgment is a really big part, and then having that safe space. And then also coming back to language, it's really about the language you use, how to guide, and then also how to feedback, and how you value people's experience, and I think the value of someone's experience can sometimes just, be on the sideline if you're really focusing on, I don't know, making it to Worlds or making the next Olympic team, and you're really focused on results and how it looks externally. Which is, of course, it's a sport, and you need the skills, and good technique is just beautiful to watch, and I love to watch that. And I'm really sure the one can inform the other. It's not that one cancels out the other, or they don't coexist. They completely coexist, and they completely can feed each other as well. And by giving this creative space also to, for example, younger athletes, or anyone, actually, anybody at that skating journey, it doesn't matter when you started, it doesn't matter how well you skate. If you have the space, either in the studio and then transferring that on the ice, to just explore the movement, just explore how you enjoy skating on the ice, how you enjoy moving on the ice. It becomes really a self-expression, and not the focus of, long lines are what women should be doing. And yes, long lines look beautiful. I love long lines as well. But that's not the only thing I want and need to see. So, and that comes again also to helping people, we can say either young skaters that are competitive or hobby, or adults that are competitive or hobby, or professionals in show life, or someone who started at 50, it doesn't matter, to really allow them to move and feel and be what they want to be. And I think that has also a lot to do with, what you talked to Caitlin Weaver about, like supporting people to open up to be open about who they are and who they want to be, and not be confined by what is expected of the role, female and male roles we need to put or should portray in competition, for example. And that's not only competition, right? If you're just in a regular practice session and let it be just a recreational session, there's still all those expectations in that space of the ice rink. There's still the females do laybacks and spirals, and the boys do big jumps thing going on. And I'm just very passionate about just letting the creativity flow and the movement flow, and opening that space up for people to explore.
One of my favorite skaters who I think has been getting more recognition is Sonia Hilmer, and she choreographs for herself. And she does really interesting programs, and I think she's been getting, increasingly getting the respect for it, not necessarily in her scores. She's one of those skaters that I think our scores don't often reflect the value of that creativity, because if you don't have, the incredible speed and deep edges to match, you don't get the PCS scores, even if what you're doing is, beautiful and interesting, and creative. So there's that as an issue in the competitive judging of all of this. But she has a matrix program where she is doing so many interesting movements, including cantilever with her sort of matrix neo arms, and it's fantastic. And it's playing with things that you might more commonly see in a man's program in some ways than only in like the women's version of doing a matrix program. So I think it's just super fun to see that. But it's rare in the competitive world, but when we have those people, they stand out, and I think attract a lot of attention. But circling back, with my little tangent, that was what was popping into my mind. But circling back to, I think this tension, not necessarily a bad thing, but this tension between skating as something that is presented to an audience, to judges. It has this external visual, element. And then what you're talking about with the somatic practices and coming from an internal place of how it feels for the skater, I think when I was first thinking about that, I was going, oh, but what if it feels really interesting but doesn't look interesting? And, is that a worry? Do you find that what skaters do that might feel interesting will look interesting as well? And I mean, even just leaving aside the sort of codified rules of the sport perspective, even just thinking about it from a perspective as an art form, how do those things coexist?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, it depends where depends kind of on the space where you are improvising and where you are where you are moving. So I mean, I definitely have had that many times where it's like, oh, this feels so great and so, whatever, like I'm leaning really deep, and then you film yourself and you're like, that doesn't look like anything at all. That happens. I think it depends. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of the improvisation, I think it really is a tool that can really go alongside if let's say you are competitive, and that is, you're on, let's just say, okay, you're competitive on an international level. Mm-hmm. And you're doing this regularly, a kind of a safe exploration of movement, and you're going from a place of how it feels. Doesn't necessarily have to be for somebody to watch, that can solely exist for yourself. It doesn't need to be seen by anyone. If you want it to be seen and somebody is happy to watch, then great. But then also, inviting somebody into that space, can also be very vulnerable, because you are not moving with the intention of looking good. So, one is that it can just inform your movement style, your creative development, your finding of yourself, of your character, of your artistic self. And then the other thing is, it can, of course, inform very specific movement when you're like, and I find that a lot with improvisation. I'm like, oh, this felt really interesting. And then I try to repeat, and I try to find, okay, what actually is it? Like, where am I really starting this movement? Where is it really going? What can I do? Maybe can I change the dynamic, the rhythm, the direction, how can I connect that to my edges? Can I do that maybe on a long glide on one edge or not? Like, is that even physically possible? So I think there's different spaces. The space where you explore, the space where you transpose into actual like things you can repeat. And then that, of course, also informing your presence in the performance of competitive or show programs, and the movements you use, and how you feel while you're moving, and how much you can connect to yourself and actually enjoy. I think that's also something that a lot of competitors find very difficult, to enjoy the moment of competing, to enjoy those 3.5, 4 minutes, or however long your program is, to really be present and feel the moves you do and feel what you're doing. And so it has all those different levels. And I think it's a good point. Like, can that be conflicting? But for me, it all kind of weaves in and out of each other. And I think that's the beautiful part about it. And that was something actually really interesting. Coming back to the survey, one coach said, like, actually, I think improvisation should only be used once a year when new programs are made. To keep the repetitiveness and keep the precision of the choreography. And that's totally valid. I'm also a believer in not changing choreography all the time, but really working on the quality over the season. Of course, you'll adjust, but not putting new things in every few weeks. And where I get that point, my point is about, then if I only use improvisation once a year, I'm expecting something from the student or the skater that isn't exposed to that. They're not comfortable with that. They don't even know what to do. And that's something I mostly encounter when I make programs, is that if I ask, like, shall we do a little bit of improvisation on the music you chose, or we chose, or and a lot of them are too timid. They're afraid of judgment. They're afraid other people are going to laugh. They don't know what to do. So it also becomes a practice for them to connect everything they know technically, right? Like all the steps, for example, you've learned, you can, try to find new ways how you combine them. So just letting your body take over and not think about it, and not only copying what the coach is doing. So yeah. Long answer to your question.
No, and there's so many pieces of that are very interesting. And I think one thing that I wanted to pick up on is that, piece around choreography and creativity too. And this is something that I've been thinking about as I talk to more choreographers, is that I think it's such an interesting, and the more I think about it, kind of an odd thing, how much value we give in competitive skating to the work of the choreographer rather than the work of the skater in some ways. It's or that's the way it will often be. It's like, oh, you went to a fancy choreographer and they gave you a better program and now you're going to get better, you're going to get these better PCS scores. Like that's said, those kinds of things are said all the time. And, I know obviously being exposed to and practicing interesting choreography is going to help the skater grow themselves, of course. I'm not saying there shouldn't be, external inputs or choreographers or any of that, but it does seem like what's often missing there is a way of developing or valuing the skater's own creativity there. And so this is maybe just a statement, not a question, but this is something that I've been thinking about, where how rare it is to see skaters. I think maybe as their careers go on, you see more people that are involved in their own choreography, but that is relatively rare in the competitive world, and always seems strange when one of the things that we're measuring is their composition of their programs. So if you have thoughts on that, my little sudden soapbox moment there, but
yeah. I mean, I think my impression is that a lot of choreographers are trying to involve the athletes. I mean, and you have to, because it's their body, they have to skate it, and if things don't work, you have to, make it work for them. But yes, it is a really interesting point, because out of experience, I can say some students are really invested and really involved, and they're like, oh, let me show you this move, and what do you think about this? Or can I do this here? And for me personally, that's great, because in the end, it's their program, and I love when they get involved. And then you have skaters who just really don't think that way. They don't process movement in that way. And they're just really grateful when you're like, oh, you can connect this with this and this, and you give them just a very specific lineup of what to do, very as detailed as possible. Yeah, but I think you're right. I mean, in the end, the choreographer also, you can have an incredible choreographer, but then you can still skate the program and it doesn't come through, like it doesn't maybe totally work, or the other way around. You have a really great athlete, and yeah, they bring a lot to the table, and it's a really interesting question. I haven't really dove into that too much, but yeah, the recognition of the choreographer and the choreographer's name being there, and of course they are, again, because you never really know how much, what's the weighing here? Did the skater really contribute, or did the choreographer really mostly create everything themselves? Or you just don't know how that process has gone. So that's something, I guess, that's not really measurable, because we all weren't there, and then we just see the end product that comes on the screen or where, from competition. But yeah, it's a really interesting aspect to think about.
And it's I've always been interested. Every once in a while, somebody will do some documentation of their choreography process, and I think that's always such an interesting thing when we do get those glimpses of what it looks like to be working on something. Which even that if you're filming it, you're that changes the process by the act of it being observed. So there's always that question as well. But it's very interesting as a viewer to have that sense of what is the work in progress of of something that you're going to then see as more or less a finished product at the end. And I would if I was if I was designing, made for TV competitions, and I've said this before, but I would love there to be some kind of a, quick choreography, improvisational competition, because I think it would be so interesting to see if you gave a bunch of skaters you gave everyone pieces of music and saw what they could come up with if you gave them half an hour to go work on something and come back and present it. I think that would be so fun to see what people could do. But that's
that would be really fun.
That's that again. If somebody wants to, TV producer wants to make a made for TV thing in Japan or something, that would be my goal.
Yeah, I think that would be so hard to judge, because already the sport, like, it's so subjective. What you like, what style you like, what movement you like, what, which person you kind of, I don't know, find interesting to watch. And I just find that always that anyway, the judging of the artistry is so difficult, because in the end, it's personal taste, and who's to say this taste is better than that taste? And then we come back to kind of conforming to this is what is generally accepted, so that's what gets more points. It's just it's a very difficult topic. I mean, our sport is also very aware of and has been aware of for a long time. So and I mean, I don't have any solution to that. It's just it comes inherent in the connection of artistry and sport. So yeah, it might just forever stay a challenge.
Yeah, we all have to be okay with living in the in these ambiguous spaces that don't have easy answers, because that's also what we like about it. Figure skating is the in-between. When you talk about doing improvisation to music or versus doing improvisation without music, that's something that, again, I've just recently been thinking about. I think in the skating context, I'd always associated, put on a piece of music and then interpret this piece of music. But I think a lot of improvisational practices emphasize not, starting from a place of that external output. Do you use both? Or how do you approach that question?
Yeah, so I think I see it a bit as a toolbox. So improvising to music, I love it. You go into the emotion, you pick music you connect with, and that's wonderful. Which also actually in the survey I asked about, and a lot of coaches are using that practice of, trying the skater to interpret different styles of music. And that's really great, because it gets them moving and exploring. And that's kind of one tool to use. And then in improvisation, in somatic practices, what I've been saying, like, it's much more internal focus. So when you improvise to music, you're almost 100% certain that you're going to move with the energy of the music. You're going to anticipate the crescendo to, maybe do a big slide or split jump or long spiral. And so the movements are really stimulated by the dynamics of the music. And then in terms of somatic practices and improvisation, we also have music, but usually it's much more like ambient, like background vibe that doesn't really emphasize any type of energy. And you can go like intense, you can go really low key. And with that, you just have much more room to really stay with your internal sensations, really, go with your body, go with, if let's say that the theme or like the exploration starts from, let's say, sensing into internal spaces in your body, for example, you can really stay with that and move from this place of space, rather than being like, oh, there's big music, and then I go big because the music is big. So that's the massive difference. It really allows you to stay more with yourself. It's not so distracting in my personal experience. And yeah, I think something also to say here is what you like to kind of connect to what you were saying earlier, like, do these things conflict each other, like somatic improvisation and competition or performance? Actually, I've been doing a series of It's called Silent Solo, since 2016. And basically my structure is always there's no music. So in a performance, in a show, there might be a lot of lighting, little lighting. It really depends on where I perform. And it's just silent. And I just really move from my present state in that now, whatever that now is. And I found it really like, yeah, for me, it's become like almost, I don't know how even to describe it, but I find it really interesting, the difference to staying with myself, knowing I'm performing and people are watching. And I had actually one experience where, I was like, closed my eyes in the beginning, connected to my breath and like started moving. And after I think maybe like 45 seconds or so, I was like, I'm just moving to move. So I just stopped again and I just kind of had to land again, land in my body, land in my blades. And it's the rink, there's people, and then you just allowing myself to be like, no, I'm going to come back to starting from a point of clear intention, of clear sensation, really being in whatever I am in now. And I found that a really fascinating concept for myself that I've been doing. What is it now, 2024? So yeah, many years, 6, 7, no, 20. What did I say? When did I start? 2016. Yeah, so 8 years almost. And yeah, I find that a really interesting thing, how that can come into the performative space as well, and how that no music topic can also exist in a performative space, which if we look at, of course, I've been very much influenced by contemporary dance through my degree and through my university. But I find that in contemporary dance, or generally, if we look at dance, you have ballet and hip hop and street and flamenco and contemporary and modern, and you have all these flowers on the ground that all look different and feel different and have different trainings and different concepts and beliefs. And in skating, I guess, and that's one of my hopes also, like that was one of my aims in that research, is like, can I find a different space for skating to exist outside of either a competition setting or a performative setting that's in a way like classical performance show, where you either have a gala or something like Disney on Ice, etc. Can I find another space how we can use this, how it can exist and how it can grow? So I think that's a place, where I've been exploring for a long time. And I think people generally, like, there is quite an interest also in the worldwide community, I feel like, to explore more. You've been telling me, for example, about the fact that Denis Vasilyev's has a gala program where he improvises a part of it each time. So there are shifts in interest and shifts in how things can look like. And I just think we're still quite in the beginning in terms of skating and moving on ice. Like I think there's a lot to find and a lot of things to explore and a lot of spaces to discover. And that, of course, just needs to start somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I think, such a great segue also, because I want to come back to your Body Melts I mean, it's supposed to say performance. That's not really the right word for it, but the work that you did. Yeah.
It was an immersive installation.
Thank you. Yes.
I was that. Yeah.
Yeah, so this immersive installation that you did, that was, I believe, also called Body Melt, and that was part of your degree and your research. And so can you talk a little bit about what that was and what you felt like you learned from it, or what feedback you got from that?
Yeah, it was a really interesting process, because I worked with the two figure skaters. Also, it was the first COVID summer, right? So there was also, of course, aspects that then changed the research and how that could be done. To just on a side note. But yeah, so basically I was really interested in letting the skaters, really giving them agency to influence and also carry the creative process and shape the creative process, and not be, because I think in choreography sometimes, you have your end product in mind, your visual outcomes, how you would like to have it. But in that case, I really wanted to stay open-minded in seeing what is actually possible. Like what can we do that right now I cannot imagine? What can happen that right now I don't even know yet? And again, in the somatic practice, it's really about giving the mover agency to make choices, to contribute, to influence from their experience. And so what kind of emerged throughout the research, originally I wanted to actually share something in an ice rink, and it just became really evident that just wasn't the right thing to happen. So just to give a little overview what happened in the end, what I created with the movers was, I called it an immersive installation. So it was in a theater on a stage. However, the spectators, audience, whatever you would like to call them, came in through the side. So they were also on the stage moving around. At that point, we still had, those 2 meters apart things. So there was like little crosses where everybody could stand or sit. And so the space had a 4 square meter block of ice on which you could stand or skate. Then there was also buckets of ice for the spectators to hold and sense, because throughout the process, of course, like the somatic exploration, just moving from a sense of body was one point. And then on a side note, I am also quite concerned with the climate situation of our world. So there was also an aspect that filtered into the research that we worked with ice blocks and the sensation of the melting of ice on the skin, and that translating into movement, and finding some kind of embodied response to the experience of climate change. I did not go at all in the article into that because it was already really hard to crunch everything. So I took the whole topic out. So yeah, we were working with ice blocks in the studio. Then we were also working on ice with skates. Again, improvisatory task. And what came out was that we just really wanted to share the process that we've been working on. So it was the performance, installation, sharing, what any of the above can be labeled. Yeah, can be labeled. So was that we had fixed scores. So a score meaning like one framework.
Mm-hmm.
So one framework was that you hold ice on your skin just for quite an extended period of time. You really go into the sensation of the ice and the melting process. And whenever you feel ready, or whenever you feel like it's translating, you want to translate that into movement, you start moving. Then one score was that to move on the ice on those 4 square meters. That could be with skates or without skates. And just when being on the ice, the main concept was always to stay with your sensation and move from a place of intention. And throughout the whole process, I'm going a little bit backwards now. So the main part was to come back to pausing and stillness and sensing before you move. So coming really from what I've been saying before, like from a really clear intention of movement, which I'm really interested in. Like I love watching and seeing people moving when you can really see the clarity of it, and they know really where they're going, what they want to do. And so yeah, and it was a durational piece. So it was 2 hours, limited by, unfortunately, the theater capacity. Otherwise it would have been a whole day. And the audience was invited to interact with the ice. Unfortunately, we couldn't there was limitations anyway, again, COVID, but don't need to get into that. And there was also an audio station, which people were invited to talk about their experience. That coming back to the topic of language, I find that really important in terms of communication in general, and also about sharing experiences. Yeah, and then it turned out I was thinking that the audience would kind of just move around and like look here and look there, and kind of it being quite a flowy happening, but it kind of ended up that people really sat down on those spots and just stayed there for a really long time until somebody from the theater, kindly asked them to move to another place, because they just started focusing in and really watching, observing one part of the installation. So that was a really interesting point. And then just having the difference of being on skates on a 4-meter block on the same level without any barrier to people who are watching you, like right there. It's just a very different experience as the mover, but also as the spectator, because in the ice rink, you're in the stands and the ice rink is 30 by 60. So if the skater is like way on the other side, it's, maybe 80 meters between you and them. It's a really huge space to fill with presence and with presentation. And there was much more intimate and close. So, yeah, that was interesting in terms of what that does to me in terms of moving, and again, being very clear and not doing things to impress and doing tricks to impress, but doing movement that is more intentional. And yeah, it was a challenge, and then something that definitely can be also, again, like dived in further.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear you talk about it. And even just from the little bits of the video that was produced from it, that is very different experience to watch a video than to be a part of it. But I think I could understand some of those things, and the sound of the dripping ice also, I think, made such an impression, and it made me think about the ways that as blades move on ice, the friction is melting, and so there's that piece as well. That is something I don't always think about, but yeah, just the ways that the environment and people shape each other did really come across, even in watching that video.
Great. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. The soundscape was an interesting process. Also, I worked with a sound artist, and we did some recordings in an ice rink. And then also just recording like what we were doing in the studio practice with the ice blocks, like the sounds they make. We then, tried to record those, and that all kind of shaped the soundscape. And then also I wanted to keep it, again, like more ambient, not too overpowering to the movement. So yeah, I think it's been really interesting, because throughout the last years I worked on it like mentally, and also like making my notes of where I'm going with it in the future. And at the moment yet I haven't gotten to the point of planning the like reinstallation of the installation. But yes, there's definitely some things I really would like to change, and also again working more with sound and integrating language more. But yeah, I had a longer maternity break, so I'm just getting back into my creative work, and then also the skating work, and yeah.
Yeah, well, that's really what I wanted to ask you about closing off, is where you're hoping to go with this in the future. And I will throw at you the big question that I often like to ask people as well, is what you think that the future of figure skating can and should be, which you don't have to have an answer to that giant question. You can stick to your own, personal hope for what you want to be doing in the future. But I will also give you that big question if you want to reflect on it as well.
Yes, no, I love that question actually. Well, first personally, so I offer somatic workshops for skating clubs that are basically an introduction to how that work can inform the technical training and the creative development of skaters of any level and age. So yeah, those can be a variety of days. Usually 3 days is a good start, can be shorter as well. And then I live in Switzerland, so I work here with athletes in a couple clubs and also adults. And yeah, the third part is also my creative work of, really a big interest is, opening up a variety of performative spaces that involve moving on ice, skating, can be in an ice rink, doesn't have to be in an ice rink. And just also sharing with the world and with the audiences. I think there's a lot of audience that really enjoys watching skating. I mean, how many times do you hear people like, oh yeah, whenever figure skating is on TV, I always watch it. Like people I feel like almost every person I encounter, if they're like, oh, what do you do? And I say, I work in figure skating. Like, this answer comes so frequently. And I think, if we look at art and contemporary art, there's just a lot of space of discovery. And, it can be conceptual, doesn't have to be conceptual, but just opening up spaces for any skater, from Olympic to beginner level, to just discover different modes of presentation, different modes of performing in a variety of spaces. And actually there has been, it's not like this is brand new, there have been many creative endeavors already in the last decades. But yeah, I think that is, So my main aims are offering this somatic approach of training to clubs and trying to support anybody who's interested, and coaches also who are interested in implementing this. Because I think what's important is, this is not for myself. I want to share this with people who are interested to utilize it. And then the other part is the art and finding spaces to grow. And then, so repeat that big question again.
What do you think that figure skating can and or should be in the future?
Oh, okay. I hope that it can really diversify in many ways. Starting from something like same gender or any gender teams, non-binary, just opening up spaces that in competition, seeing this in competition, to having creative expositions of developing skating movement, developing skating art, developing also skating practice, maybe how practice is done, what kind of spaces can exist in an ice rink. I think my hope for the future of figure skating is that we can really allow people to diversify, allow the practicing people to open up new spaces, because that's only going to enrich everyone. It's not going to take away, from competition. It's not going to give you less competitors, or it's not going to make competitors less good. It's just going to open up so many spaces for all kinds of people who are interested. And seeing, then things feeding each other and new things growing and developing and blooming. And I think, this has started and it's starting, and I feel like it has been there for a long time. It always probably has been there, more or less visible. But I think now also we have a great opportunity with the digital medium to connect across the world, and you're doing this such fantastically with your podcast, like getting all these voices to talk to you and to talk about what they're passionate about. And that again creates connection between people who have similar interests and can reach out. And I think, just building community connection and diversifying, that would be my wish.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Maja. I really appreciate everything that you've shared today and just the work that you're doing in so many spaces. It's really fascinating, and I can't wait to see what else grows from it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, letting me talk about my passion of somatics and figure skating. I hope it was clear enough, because there's so many aspects and so many blocks that can visually be very clearly structured. And I hope that verbally it came across enough to understand the different areas of it. And it was really wonderful to talk to you again, and also meet you in person when you were here in Zurich. That was fantastic. And thank you for growing our skating community in such a positive and proactive way. I think that's such fantastic work that you're doing.
Thank you. I'm loving it.
Thanks again to Maja for joining me. You can follow her work on YouTube and Instagram at Studio Maja Luther. Her article, Body Melts, A Somatic Approach to Figure Skating, is available in the most recent issue of the Journal of Dance and Somatic Practices. You can reach me with comments or suggestions for topics and people I should talk to by email at fsfuturepodcast@gmail.com or on Instagram and Twitter at FutureFSPodcast. If you appreciate the work, you can also support with a tip jar at futureofigureskating.pinecast.co. Remember to subscribe to The Future of Figure Skating on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts, and share it with your friends.